creativity for me is kind of synonymous with doing different things and diversity. If they can imagine it and they imagine some wonderful things, and that's something that we're there in early years to facilitate. There's room for more creativity in certain parts of education, I would say, but it's also a really wonderful innate part of others.
Hi, welcome to Creative Minds Shaping the Future. I'm your host, Emma Palastanga. I'm an educator, author, and now podcast producer, curious to discuss a range of views on creativity and curriculum. Dr. Lewis Fogarty is a director of a small group of nurseries in Berkshire and director of teaching and learning for the Department of Education at Brunel University, lecturing in leadership and management with special interests in early childhood education, continuous professional development, teacher education, leadership and policy. He also supported settings with a variety of needs as part of the DFE COVID-19 recovery scheme. He has created 2 organisations, Adventurous Leadership, a leadership platform and community helping individuals and organisations on their educational journey towards leadership excellence, and Connected International, a charity that partners with local community groups to support sustainable change through educating and empowering whole communities in areas that need it most, starting with rural Uganda. So, Dr. Fogarty, welcome. Let me start with my opening question. How do you define creativity?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So for me, it was a tricky one to think. It's a tricky one to think about, really, because it's such a broad concept, and we can talk about it in many different ways, as I'm sure we're going to go on to do. But for me, it's about drawing on a range of skills, information, opinions to solve problems, but not only to solve problems, but to inspire, instill joy, positivity in other people. So it's something, I think, for yourself sometimes, but it's also often something for other people. So I just see it as this sort of a mosaic approach to creativity that has lots of different parts to it for different reasons. But I think it's something that we often do without realizing as well. But yeah, that's how I would loosely, rambly define creativity.
I love the idea of the mosaic approach, actually, and that we do it for ourselves and also for others. That's a really interesting take on it. I think you're absolutely right. So kind of linking to that then, do you think that creativity has a place in education? Particularly, I know you have experience in early years and in school leadership. So I wonder what your take is on creativity in those areas.
Yeah, I think often you might think of creativity as being innate in early years, and absolutely children, so much is novel for children. They've got to be creative. They're learning things for the first time, much more than we are as adults. And for that reason, I think creativity is a natural part of early years, both for, the staff and teachers in terms of how they work with the children, but also for the children in terms of what they do. The classic thing of, a child shows you a picture and, you don't dare say, oh, that's a nice boat. And they say, that's an elephant, Lewis, it's not a boat. Because they've created something, and if they can imagine it and they imagine some wonderful things, and that's something that we're there in early years to support and to drive, I suppose, as well, and to facilitate. When you look to school leadership, I think often a lot of what it means to, be a good leader is different to being a good manager. And I think those 2 things are important, and often leadership would be more associated with creativity than management would. But I think you need both skill sets to be a good leader. And part of that is, for example, creatively managing budgets, other resources in terms of teachers. I mean, my colleagues in the nursery, every day they've got to deal creatively with what happens when the staff member's sick and we need to move that person over to that room, but then that means there's a gap there and that person can't have their planning time, so then maybe they need to do it tomorrow, and all this sort of moving parts about what it means to lead an organization. But in terms of studying, and I've got experience teaching in a secondary school, I think sometimes the lack of space for creativity has been a little bit disappointing, I would say. And what I mean by that is I used to teach biology, and I had, 3 lessons a week over 6 weeks to cover that part of the topic. And if I didn't get through it, then the students aren't going to learn it. And if they get tested on it, they're not going to know it. And that's tricky, because if you're enjoying something and you want to take it a bit further and there's things happening in the room, you sometimes need to stop the creativity. And that's a shame. And in higher education, I think it actually is driven from the students sometimes, that I want to teach them about leadership and what it means to be a good self-leader, but they want to know how to write a good essay in the topic they're going to be assessed on. And it's almost like they want the ingredient list, and not just the ingredient list, but also the amounts for which, how many words should be an introduction, how many should be in a conclusion, how many pages of references do I need? Is 5 okay? Is 10 okay? And it sort of just constrains what it means. And we're often asked, for example, to provide example assignments, but then the reluctance to do that is then it sort of stops people being creative, because they think that's what an assignment should be. And I'd much rather be on the side of, you can imagine, like the child drawing the boat that's an elephant. If I told them that this is a boat, this is what you've got to draw, then, or an elephant, they're not going to draw anything remotely like what they did. So there's room for more creativity in certain parts of education, I would say, but it's also a really wonderful innate part of others.
And why do you think it is so important that we um, make that space for creativity rather than giving the students the ingredients? It's almost like they want the code and they'll just
Mm.
make that, use the building blocks of the code that you give them. So why is that not okay? Why can't we just trundle through life with that approach, you
Mm.
say?
I think it could be okay if we imagine building a house. It could be okay for the foundations to make sure they're strong, like when we have the 7 areas of learning in early years, and certain components of the curriculum. But even today, as an example, I just come from a meeting with the dean of college here at Brunel, the dean of Cows, and we were talking about the education outside of the classroom. And I think creativity needs to be part of both of that, but particularly comes alive outside of the classroom, and what we're encouraging our students to do to set them apart. For example, if lots of people have a degree these days, what's different about you to get you that job? What have you done in your life that's different? And I think creativity for me is kind of synonymous with doing different things and diversity. If we're giving them those blocks and they're just putting them together in the same way, there's no uniqueness that we can celebrate, diversity to celebrate. And I think it's missing. And another example from my lecturing here, I lecture students from different countries, and we have one assignment is to critique policy, and we encourage them to critique policy from their own country, because then they are the expert. Like, I don't know about assessment policy in China. It's not even available in English, for example, but they can do a wonderful presentation on that, and they become the experts. They become creative and confident. And I think creativity and confidence have an interesting link as well, because, like, do you need to be confident to be creative? Maybe, and I think that's something to explore, maybe.
I think linking to that about the creativity and confidence, it's a really valid point. And I believe that's why we need creativity, particularly in early years. I think they do it really well, actually, but particularly in primary school and into secondary and beyond, is because those learning environments are safe spaces within which
Mm,
we can build that confidence to play around with ideas and explore new ways of working and challenge other people's thinking, which in turn challenges our own thinking.
mm,
But I think, yeah, that point about confidence is so valid, and it's our
mm,
job as educators to facilitate, that bravery, if you like, to play around with
mm.
ideas.
And I think to role model it as well. And you mentioned there about classrooms being safe spaces for children, but are schools safe places for teachers to be creative, to try different things, for them to go wrong and it to be okay? Perhaps confidence and psychological safety are precursors for creative environments. And I hadn't thought about that until we just started speaking, but what do you need in place in a culture for it to be a creative culture? And I think confidence and psychological safety would have to be part of that. Because if we don't feel safe, we're unlikely to be in the sort of the flow that you need, to be creative and to shine, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I would refer listeners and yourself back to episode 1, actually, where I speak to Tina and Claire, the head and the deputy at St Ebb's School in Oxford. And that's exactly what they talk about, is giving their staff the psychological safe space to try out new things, to not feel that if they try something and it doesn't work exactly as they want to feel they're going to be berated for it. And I think
Mm.
I will mention Ofsted. I do think that people are fearful. Will Ofsted like this? What will Ofsted think? And I was an inspector a while back now, but I feel that actually, if you know your school and you know what works, you know what the impact that whatever you're putting in place is having on the children. If that's positive, and you can show that that's a positive outcome, then be confident. And
Mm.
you're not doing it for Ofsted, you're doing it for the children.
Mm. And if we play with the idea of Ofsted and creativity a bit more, I think it's that, as a nursery owner, I'm the, registered person with Ofsted for 3 sites. And
Mhm.
so I have to deal with Ofsted. And I think there is an element of creativity in how you set Ofsted up with your team. And, we don't necessarily go as far to say we don't care about Ofsted, but it's been referred to as a necessary evil. That's not my words. I won't tell you whose words they are, but it's a wise person's words. But it's like you're saying, you're not doing things for Ofsted, you're doing them for the children, and Ofsted will come in and say that's good. And often we think about it as if you like our Ofsted strategy, it's not like a folder. This is what to do in Ofsted inspection. We have like a golden kind of golden rules, I suppose, but we think about it more as your mindset and your confidence when it comes to Ofsted, and we believe in our team. So one thing we often do, me and my business partner, is that we meet the Ofsted inspector, but then we actually go off site and we, grab a coffee and come back whilst they're in the rooms to sort of send a message to the team that we know you've got this, not in a sense of abandonment, like we've left over to you, but in a sense of, hey, don't worry, they're here, they're going to see what you do every day and you're going to do a good job, and we believe in you. And I hope that sends the message of we believe in you rather than a abandonment. I think it does. I'm sure we've done it a few times now, and it's gone well most times. Well, it's gone well every time, but
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think that's about that confidence, isn't it, that leadership need to have in their staff if they want creativity to flourish, actually. I think that's
Mm,
such a crucial element to allow that freedom and innovation. You need to have trust. And that's
mm,
clearly what you have in your staff. You trust them, with what they know and what they're doing. You trust that it's the right thing. So you step back.
mm. And it's helped me actually that I'm not early years trained. I've got a secondary teaching qualification, QTS, in secondary school teaching. So they are the experts. So I think that helps give an extra oomph behind them, knowing that they're the ones that need to be creative when it comes to how we arrange the classroom and what activities we plan, because I don't have the same knowledge they do. They're the experts. I believe in them, and they need to go and do their thing and shine. And inevitably they do, like it's a tough job working in early years, but it's a wonderful job as well. And I'm sure any early years teacher you speak to would speak to both sides of that.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to what you said earlier about building the house and the foundations, I keep
Mm,
referring back to like a knowledge-rich curriculum, which a lot of people are very, very keen on, and talk about, knowledge organizers and what we must deliver to the children. My fear, I guess, is that we will focus so much on the knowledge, on delivering knowledge, a bit back to what we talked about earlier, the coding of, so how do I write this essay? How many words should be in the
mm,
introduction? And what's the formula? I feel like we are passing on knowledge, but losing sight sometimes of the creativity. And on the flip side of that, and I spoke with Pi Corbett about this on a previous episode, that we believe that you need the knowledge in order to be creative. So
mm.
I don't know about you, but I feel like the two go hand in hand.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. They do, and like I think, like what I was just saying, that the team have the knowledge about how to, set up activities in the classroom so they can be creative with it. So I do think there's a need for both, and you need to support people to have the knowledge, but then to feel able to unleash that knowledge in new ways and bring knowledge from other. I mean, we're encouraged a lot at Brunel for interdisciplinary research, for example, education and psychology or health sciences, and how we can learn from each other and bring disciplines together to learn new things and to share new ideas creatively. And I think that's something that we could learn from, and even how we assess students and how do the assessments promote this sense of diverse thinking and variety, I suppose, rather than narrow essay questions or exams that are quite prescriptive in the knowledge they're looking for.
Yeah, to me, that's really exciting too, what you've just said, because that reflects what I promote really in primary education, is that creative curriculum, the connectedness of all the different subject areas. And I always say in real life, we don't go around in boxes of maths and English and science. Actually, everything is interconnected. And you beautifully illustrated that by saying about what we can learn from each other. I feel there are so many transferable skills, and if we combine that knowledge in a really exciting, powerful unit of learning, then it not only engages children, but it encourages them to make links across and between subjects and pull all that
Yeah.
together and make meaning for themselves as well.
No, definitely. And I've got a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we went to Legoland in Easter, and then we were at home doing cars down ramps and figuring out the different trajectories and the weight of the cars. And of course, we weren't sitting down afterwards and talking about physics laws
Yeah,
and stuff, but the learning they had about how to make the car go straight and how cool the jump could be, it was all centered on just playing. And
yeah.
like this, there was no box about, okay, now we're going to learn about this. And it was play, and the learning that was inherent with that is just why play is so important, not just in early years. Play is important throughout education, in my view, and it comes hand in hand with creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Tina and Claire are developing play throughout their school. They've taken it up to year 2 at the moment. And I have no doubt that when they see it working so well there, it will continue right the way through the school. And as you
Mm,
just said, I think play and creativity are almost synonymous, actually. There's a lot, I think we play with ideas. If you think of, musicians and artists, they play with ideas, problem solve, and we play with, well, if this idea didn't work, how can we tweak it? How can we alter that to make it work? So yeah, I
mm,
do think play and creativity do really go hand in hand for sure.
mm.
Yeah, thank you. So linking back to either your own school days personally, or your teaching days in secondary school, or even your lecturing days, can you give me an example of a lesson that you've either enjoyed learning or enjoyed teaching, and why do you
Mm.
think it's stuck in your mind, particularly from a creative perspective?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is teaching students about lactic acid in biology. And what I literally, we don't have to do it now, but if you just stand there with your arms out wide and try to hold them there, after a while you will start to feel a burn in your arms. And we used to have a competition. It was an all boys school I taught in. Have a competition who can
Laugh
create
the
keep their
longest.
arms there. Yeah, exactly. As they felt the burn, then of course we look at the equation for lactic acid buildup and afters and how we're respiring anaerobically and all that kind of thing. But just the competition and the kind of fun that they had, and seeing them actually afterwards, with the friends that weren't in the class, like having another competition at break time, how to do that.
Oh,
There's not that, well, maybe there are more concepts I'm giving credit to, but where you can literally feel the equation on the board,
mhm.
then I just think really stands out to me as a fun lesson that they will remember. Whether or not they remember the exact symbols of the equation, they remember the effects of lactic acid and how that kind of thing. And I suppose thinking again about being a student, and this might be a little bit tangential, but as a white man growing up in Berkshire, like I didn't experience racism, let's say then, but when I was on my master's education program, I was taught by a black now professor, Paul Miller, and he introduced me to like systemic racism and what that and injustice, I suppose, because prior to that I was very sheltered, I suppose. And it was like, whoa, it really is true. I think the more you know there's so many things you don't know.
Yeah.
And he just, yeah, opened my eyes to to the injustices that many people experience, not just due to race, but other differences. And for me, that was really powerful. And it wasn't necessarily that how he taught it was through his raw experience, actually, and what he experienced was experiencing still at that stage, and the work he had done around it to try to, change the systems around that. And so two very different things there, lactic acid and racism, but two things about, that have really been, yeah, stood out to me from, yeah, the way they were taught and how I've been able to teach them.
And I think the link there, I don't know if you were aware of it, but you spoke about experiences in both cases. So the
Mm,
students experiencing that burn of the lactic acid and your professor having sadly experienced the racism. It is through experiences that we learn either our own experiences or those of others. And
yeah, no,
as an Ofsted inspector, I remember observing children in forest school, young children in forest
mm,
school. It was in their school, their own school, um, but their language development was incredible. They were
mm,
experiencing digging, and it was about passing the bucket and passing the spade and let's dig a hole. And it was because of what they were actually actively involved in that they were
mm,
needing to use the language to achieve what they wanted. It wasn't set up in a classroom, right? Now we're going to say this sentence. It
yeah,
was, real life learning that gave them that
yeah.
opportunity. So I do think there's a lot to be said for having fun and giving children rich experiences.
Absolutely experience rather than a picture of a bucket and a spade, an actual
Yeah,
bucket and a spade, and a challenge to move mud from there to there, whatever it might
yeah.
be, I think is a much better learning and teaching experience, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fun is what mustn't be lost from learning, at whatever level, but especially
Mm,
at primary. And I think, going right the way up, we need to be having fun with our learning and developing lifelong learners as
mm,
well.
definitely.
How are you creative yourself, either at
Mm.
work or at home, any aspect of your life?
I'm very open. I'm a very open person in the sense that, I'm open to learning at all points, and that, meeting a professor or meeting somebody that's just walking down the street, I don't know what they do, I'm just, I'm very open to learning from all areas. So I think that's part of my energy, I suppose. I think I've got a playful and creative energy. I like to have a laugh. I don't take myself too seriously. I don't mind playing in the grey a little bit as well, I think. And, I don't know, one example of this that came to my mind actually, I remember we were running a dinner before for students that have families in the military. And it
Mhm.
was a dinner funded partly by the MOD. And one of the rules was we couldn't buy alcohol with with the money. And I found that we all agreed, it's a dinner party, it's a kind of a black tie affair, it's a fancy dinner.
Mm.
People are paying money for their tickets, or some of the people were, and others were guests, etc. So we couldn't really have it without alcohol. So the idea I had was to pay the chef more money, and then he would bring the alcohol. And of course, a little bit grey there. Maybe you want to feel free to keep that in. But I think sometimes there's things like that where you can play in the grey a little bit, have a bit of fun, and maybe break a few rules and see what happens. But there's other ways you can, go outside of what's normal, I suppose, and think of the alternative ways. And I try to do that. And with my nursery, even so, when my business partner and I thought about starting a nursery, what we looked at was two empty classrooms in a secondary school and a strip of land that was where the gardeners of the school dumped all of the grass cuttings and bush trimmings. And I said to the head teacher, I'd like to put a nursery in a garden there. You think you're mad, Lewis? But I'm like, no, I can see it now. We're going to knock through there, put a step there, get some bark that end, a mud kitchen here. And now that's all the thing. So I think I love a little diagram, I suppose. So when I've got this idea, I love a little bird's eye diagram that I get going of how it's going to look. And maybe that's a more ethical example to share with your listeners about how to be creative. But I think, yeah, just not being confined by what is a bit unusual, I suppose. I don't mind people thinking I'm strange. Like I say, who wants to be normal anyway? And yeah, I think that's some examples of how I think creatively, and try to encourage other people to do the same as well.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I think I've jotted a few words down there about
Mm.
curiosity, playfulness, stepping outside your comfort zone. And
Mm.
really, that phrase of thinking outside the box is sort of epitomized in what you've just said. So I think it is really crucial that we encourage more people to be creative and not be frightened to go against the grain, if you like. There's, a lot of people want to follow one another. Let's be that individual that leads, that does something a bit different, a bit crazy to
Mm.
others.
Yeah, there's a lovely video, maybe a link for your listeners, about how to start a movement, and it's at a random festival, and there's this one lone guy just dancing to this music by himself, and then the second person joins, and actually the commentator of the video says that the first follower is actually the bravest person, because he turns the lone nut, as they put it, into a leader. And then a few more people join, and then a few more, and then before you know it, you're strange not doing it. And
Yeah.
it's a really wonderful video about the power of, yeah, followers, and leaders, and what makes a leader, and how to start a movement. But ultimately, you've got to go out your comfort zone and have a bit of fun, and they can do it. So yeah, I'll try to find the link to share with
Yeah,
you for that.
that sounds brilliant. And it sounds a little bit like my podcast as well. I kind of came up with this crazy idea of talking about creativity. And I
Mm.
thought, oh, I'll throw it out to one or two people. They may or may not be interested. And I've been really thrilled actually with the number of people that have come forwards from a range of different backgrounds, primarily at the moment in education, but
Mm.
from different aspects of education, really
Mm.
interested, really passionate. And I do feel that I'm building a real network of both guests and listeners. And it's really
Mm.
exciting to see that there is this belief in creativity and this want to drive creativity forwards in education as well. So
Mm.
let's build that network. Let's be those brave people. So what's next for you, Dr. Lewis Fogarty?
Well, next week is the expected arrival of my third son. So
Congratulations.
I'll have three boys under 5. Thank you. So my wife and I are eagerly preparing for that. So that's what's in my immediate future. So some creativity will be needed in how to. A friend of mine, he said, you can't do man mark anymore. You've got to do zonal, because there's only 2 parents and 3 children. So yeah, that's in my immediate future. But I think for me, it's about. I feel very fortunate to have the life I have, the life that I've created, and I want to continue living that fulfilling life. And I find joy in being busy. So it's that the ikigai concept of the joy in always being busy, doing things you love, and continuing to do that really, and continuing to curate my life, like snipping things out that aren't fulfilling anymore, or getting in the way, let's say, and can add in things that bring more joy, I suppose. So that's in my immediate and short, mid, and long term future. I think continuing to design the life that I and my wife and my family want, and yeah, doing it with a smile on my face, I think. And I know Timothy Wamby is one of the reasons we started speaking, and he opened my eyes as well, like Paul Miller in some ways, to Uganda and the life in rural Africa, and what that can mean. And it just really put things into perspective about what you think you've got going on in your life to
Mm,
what other people have going on in theirs. So I plan on being very grateful for what I have, and recognizing what problems really are, and different levels of creativity needed to solve them. But that's for me, really, just carry on living the best life I can.
brilliant. Thank you. And who else would you like to hear on creative minds shaping the future and why?
Yeah. So I don't have a specific name for you, but the kind of
Okay.
type of person for me would be, I love the expression, there's 2 people in this world you need to make proud: 8-year-old you and 80-year-old you. And that's that playfulness that your 8-year-old would have, and the kind of great gratitude and the wiseness of your 8-year-old self. So I think it would be lovely, if you can, to try to get an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, maybe a great grandparent and a grandchild, to come on to hear what it means to be creative in an 80-year-old's mindset versus an 8-year-old's mindset, and yeah, just the energy of a child. If you could find a child to come on and talk to you about creativity, I think we could all learn an awful lot. And it actually, now I'm talking, it makes me think about a Nivea advert before about it was a they asked adults, or they asked children, what would you change about your body, and they asked adults, what would you change about your body, and the adults said, oh, my ears stick out a bit too much, or I'd like more hair, or my nose is too big, I'd like it smaller. Then they asked children, and they said like things much more creative, things like, I want a dragon's tail, or wings so I could fly, an extra eye so I could see more things, and all these wonderfully creative things. And I wonder what happens to us. Well, I have some ideas about what happens to us to lose that sense of curiosity and wonder and awe and magic, and become, a bit more self-loathing in some ways, not to be too negative, but why don't we keep that sort of spark that we have as children? At least in more sense, of course, my 4-year-old loves to run around naked. Of course, there's reasons why we need to grow up a little bit. We can't be doing that. But yeah, I think it could be really interesting to ask the same question to an 8-year-old and 8-year-old, or around about those ages, and see what they say. But yeah, I hope that's helpful.
That's a brilliant idea. So if there are any 8-year-olds with 80-year-old grandparents, or 80-year-old grandparents with younger grandchildren, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. I think that would be a wonderful concept, to hear the difference in creativity. And I think it's so important that we hang on to that childlike curiosity, joy, fascination with the world, and that, creativity is innate within us. Let's not lose it. Let's unleash it, as has been said before on this podcast. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. It's been really, really interesting talking to you and hearing different perspectives, different ideas about creativity. And yeah, really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed Dr. Lewis Fogarty's thoughts on creativity in education. Next month, I speak to Dr. Mark Williams, an internationally recognised professor of cognitive neuroscience. Here he is with a few words.
From all different angles and from all different levels, I think there needs to be a lot more creativity in schools. The point of education is to bring up wonderful human beings who can be successful and can be the best they can be, so that they can actually change the world. Creativity also teaches you how to be wrong, or how to make mistakes. And I think that's another thing that we don't do well in society these days, is actually make mistakes. And of course, we don't learn if we're not making mistakes.
I have some fantastic guests lined up. Some you will know and some you will want to know. I'm really excited to announce I'll be releasing this podcast once a month, and I'll be talking with philosophers, artists, mathematicians, scientists, engineers, innovators, and educators. If this sounds like you, maybe you have a view on creative thinking or creative expression, please get in touch by following me at ACPC4A, the number 4, on X, or Emma Palastanger on LinkedIn to connect. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you can stay up to date on the release of each episode. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next episode of Creative Minds Shaping the Future.